There's a quiet kind of pain that deep thinkers carry. It doesn't scream. It doesn't ask for attention. It just lingers, like an invisible weight pressing on the soul. It's the pain of noticing too much, of hearing what wasn't said, of feeling what others refuse to feel. You might be sitting at a dinner table. The conversation is light, full of laughter and harmless chatter. Someone talks about the weather. Another shares the latest gossip. Everyone nods, smiles, and plays along. But then you speak. You say something real, something honest, something that doesn't fit into the rhythm of small talk. And suddenly the room changes. No one laughs. No one responds. Someone shifts in their seat. Another clears their throat. Someone murmurs, "Anyway." The moment passes, but you felt it. That small rejection, that unspoken discomfort. It happens more often than you care to admit. Carl Jung understood this perfectly. He believed that the deeper you go into your own mind, the more alienated you become from the world around you. Not because you're broken, but because the world prefers illusion. It rewards those who conform, who blend in, who nod without questioning, who pretend to be okay even when everything inside them is falling apart. But deep thinkers, they don't pretend. They can't. They see through things, through fake smiles, hollow systems, empty traditions. Jung once said, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society." That's not a compliment. It's a warning. Because in a society that doesn't value depth, being self-aware isn't a superpower. It's a quiet curse. And that curse starts early. From childhood, most deep thinkers are misunderstood. They ask questions other kids don't. They wonder why adults lie, why love sometimes feels conditional, why rules feel arbitrary, and instead of answers, they hear, "Don't ask so much, just do as you're told. Why can't you be like everyone else?" So they learn to stay quiet. But inside, the questions never stop. They only grow sharper, heavier. By the time they become adults, they've built entire worlds inside their minds. Worlds full of unspoken thoughts, unseen truths, unexplored feelings. But the external world doesn't welcome that. At work, they're told to follow the script. In relationships, they're told they're too intense. On social media, they're told to just be positive. So they hide again. Not because they want to, but because they've learned what happens when they don't. Jung believed that society fears what it doesn't understand, and deep thinkers, they are deeply misunderstood. When you express a complex idea, people think you're showing off. When you sit in silence, they assume you're judging them. When you talk about trauma, they say you're being dramatic. When you ask questions, they call you an overthinker. But you're not overthinking. You're seeing clearly. You're observing what others miss. You're feeling what others are too afraid to feel. And that makes people uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right. You speak truths that others spend their entire lives avoiding. You bring light to the shadows they've buried. You remind them that something essential is missing, and that reminder hurts. That's why deep thinkers are so often met with resistance, mockery, or distance. Not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. A mirror. A mirror to all that's been suppressed. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow. And most people don't want to meet their shadow, so they reject the person who reflects it. That person is often you. Have you ever tried to warn someone? To tell them a hard truth before it was too late? To help them see a pattern that was destroying them? And instead of gratitude, you were met with silence or anger. or you were ghosted completely. You weren't being negative. You were being real. But real is dangerous. Real doesn't sell. Real doesn't entertain. Real makes people think. And thinking hurts. Jung said that most people don't really think. They just rearrange their prejudices. They repeat what they've heard. They defend what they've been taught. They perform. But deep thinkers, they question. They deconstruct. They reconstruct. They stay up late wrestling with contradictions that everyone else ignores. They don't seek approval. They seek understanding. And in doing so, they often lose the approval of those who choose to live on the surface. That's the quiet tragedy of awareness. The more you awaken, the more isolated you become. Not because you're flawed, but because everyone else is still asleep. And yet, you still try to connect. You dim your light to make others comfortable. You soften your words so you don't scare them. You pretend not to notice what's broken. But no matter how hard you try, it never really works. Because truth has a frequency, and once you start vibrating at that level, you can't unsee. You can't go back to pretending. So what do? Where do you go? How do you keep living in a world that fears the very thing you are? If you've ever felt like you were too much for the world, you weren't wrong. You weren't broken. You were simply born into a system that was never designed to support depth. Jung called it mass-mindedness. It's the idea that most people don't think independently. They don't explore the truth for themselves. They simply absorb what culture hands them, without ever asking if it's real, if it's right, or if it was ever theirs to believe in the first place. From the moment you enter this world, you're handed a script. You're told what's good, what's bad, what success looks like, what failure means. You're taught to compete, to obey, to smile even when you feel like you're dying inside, to be nice even when someone disrespects you. And if you follow that script, the world applauds you. It calls you mature, successful, well-adjusted. But if you question it, if you say, "Why are we doing this?" If you whisper, "This doesn't feel right," suddenly you're the problem. You're told you're too sensitive, too intense, too negative, too difficult. But Jung knew the truth. You're not too anything. You're just awake, and the world fears what's awake fears. Let's go deeper. Think about your earliest memories of school. Were you ever rewarded for your creativity, for your emotional insight, for your curiosity about life's bigger questions? Or were you praised for memorizing the right answers, for sitting still, for being quiet, even when something inside you wanted to scream? For most deep thinkers, school is the first place they feel the heavy weight of conformity pressing down on their spirit. You sit in rows. You're told what to think, when to speak, what to believe, not based on truth, but on authority. The world doesn't want you to think deeply. It wants you to follow. Because followers are profitable. Followers are predictable. Followers don't disrupt the system. Jung saw this clearly. A culture that discourages inner exploration is a culture built on fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the truth, fear of the human soul. And that fear seeps into everything. It becomes the way we date, where surface-level attraction is rewarded over real emotional resonance. It becomes the way we work, where status and productivity are worshipped, but meaning is dismissed. It becomes the way we live, rushing, scrolling, performing, never stopping to ask, is any of this even real? Is this what I want? Jung believed the soul isn't meant to move at the speed of modern life. It needs space, silence, stillness, shadow. But deep thinkers don't just long for that space. They create it. And when they do, the people around them start to feel uncomfortable because they've been taught to fear stillness, to run from introspection, to confuse numbness with peace. When a deep thinker walks into a room, they carry a certain presence, a stillness that isn't empty, but full, a gaze that doesn't just look, but sees. And people feel that. They feel seen. And for those who've spent their entire lives hiding from themselves, being seen is terrifying. So they push you away. Not because they hate you, but because your presence makes them feel everything they've been running from. This is why so many deep thinkers are labeled as loners, or weird, or too intense. Not because you are, but because you live at a frequency most people aren't tuned into. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That line, it stings, because you know exactly what he meant. How many times have you tried to talk about something real, something about meaning or trauma or why we're here, only to be met with silence, or worse, polite small talk? How many times have you looked at someone and seen straight through their mask but said nothing because you knew they couldn't handle it? How often have you had to dull yourself just to be understood? That isn't connection. That's survival. And surviving in a world that doesn't understand depth comes with a price. You start to doubt yourself. You wonder, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I should just stop thinking so much. But don't. Please, don't. Because the moment you abandon your depth is the moment you abandon your soul. And Jung would never want that for you. He believed the world's greatest hope lies in individuals brave enough to remain conscious in an unconscious society. Brave enough to keep questioning, even when it hurts. Brave enough to stay awake, even when sleep looks so tempting. You are that hope. But let's be honest, being a deep thinker doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder, because you don't get to pretend. You don't get to lie to yourself. You don't get to ignore the ache in your chest when things don't align. You feel everything. The beauty, the tragedy, the chaos, the silence. And in a world that tells you to numb, to scroll, to move on, feeling is rebellion. So, rebel. If you're a deep thinker, you've probably walked through life wondering, why do I always feel so tired? Not tired in your body, but in your spirit. You walk into a room and sense the tension before anyone says a word. You listen to someone talk and hear the pain behind their smile. And by the end of that moment, they feel better, lighter, calmer. But you feel like something was taken from you. Like the air was sucked out of your lungs. And you're left asking, why does everyone come to me for support, but disappear when I'm the one who needs help? Jung called this projection and sometimes unconscious vampirism. Let's unpack that for a moment. Projection happens when someone attributes their own unresolved emotions onto you. And deep thinkers, you're like open canvases. People feel safe projecting onto you because you're calm, you're patient, you're self-aware. But here's the danger. When you're constantly absorbing the emotional weight of others, you start to disappear. Your own thoughts get clouded. Your own voice grows quiet. Your own needs blur until you can't remember what they were. And the worst part? No one notices, because you've always been the strong one, the calm one, the one who seems to have it all figured out. But inside, you're exhausted. This is how the world drains deep thinkers, not through violence, but through dependency. Relationships turn into one-way therapy sessions. Friendships become emotional rescue missions. And slowly, you lose something vital, yourself. Jung believed the world doesn't just ignore deep thinkers. It uses them. Because people are drawn to depth, but they're also terrified by it. So instead of honoring it, they extract it. They take your insight. They take your empathy. They take your presence. But they rarely give it back. And when you finally pull away, when you set a boundary, when you whisper, "I need space," they call you selfish, or cold, or distant. But they don't see that your silence isn't rejection. It's survival. You're not cold. You're recharging. Because being awake in an unconscious world is draining beyond words, especially when that world is designed to keep you distracted. Let's talk about media for a moment. The average person sees thousands of ads every single day, each one crafted to whisper, "You're not enough. Fix yourself. Buy this." And if you're a deep thinker, you see it. You see how fear sells, how beauty is packaged as worth, how our attention is hijacked in the name of profit. And even when you know it's all a lie, it still wears you down. Because deep thinkers don't just consume information. They absorb it. They process it. They feel it. And that takes energy. So much more than most people can imagine. Even something as small as scrolling social media isn't passive for you. Every post, every headline, every carefully curated image, it all sparks reflection. It all wakes up the questions no one else wants to ask. Why is everyone pretending to be so happy? Why doesn't anyone talk about grief, about shame, about fear? Why is vulnerability edited out like it's something to be ashamed of? Jung believed that the collective unconscious shapes society more than logic ever could. And right now, that collective unconscious is terrified of depth. So every system we live inside, school, work, media, teaches you not to feel, not to ask why, not to stop and look around. Just keep going, keep performing, keep distracting yourself. But you can't. You can't just keep moving like nothing matters. Not without asking, what does any of this even mean? So you pause, you reflect, you feel, and the world punishes you for it. At school, you were labeled distracted. At work, too philosophical. In relationships, too intense, too emotional, too much. But what you really are is real. And in a culture built on performance, being real is a radical act. But radical acts have consequences. You lose friends, you lose promotions, you lose invitations, because you refuse to flatter egos. You refuse to pretend everything's fine. You refuse to smile when your heart is breaking. And that refusal, it's powerful, but it's also lonely. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." You are awake, and the price of awakening is isolation. But there is hope, because there are others out there, scattered across the world, who see what you see, who feel what you feel, who are also waiting for someone to finally say what everyone else is too afraid to admit. And when two deep thinkers find each other, the world shifts, just a little. The illusion cracks, the truth breathes, and the soul feels a little less alone. So don't shut yourself down. Don't numb your insight just to be accepted. There comes a moment in every deep thinker's life when you ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth seeing what others refuse to see? Is it worth carrying thoughts too heavy to speak out loud? Is it worth feeling everything so fully when so few will ever understand? Jung believed that moment is not a breakdown. It's a beginning, because that's when you decide, will you shrink yourself to fit into a world that feels too small, or will you expand into your truth, even if it means walking alone? The world will not ask you to do this. In fact, it will beg you not to. It will offer you comfort in exchange for your silence. It will praise you for fitting in. It will reward your numbness with approval. But deep down, you'll know that kind of life isn't living. It's only surviving. And surviving is never enough for someone like you. You were born with a mind that refuses to be tamed, a heart that refuses to go numb, a soul that cannot pretend. That is not a weakness. That is your calling. Jung believed that each of us carries a unique psychological task, an inner destiny. And the deeper the thinker, the more sacred the task becomes. Not everyone is meant to go inward. Not everyone is meant to confront the shadow. Not everyone is meant to walk into the fire of the self and come back transformed. But you are. And no, it's not an easy path. There is no map, no cheering crowd, no obvious finish line. Some days, you will feel lost. Other days, you will feel cursed. But listen carefully. That emptiness you sometimes feel inside, it isn't failure. It's space. Space for something real to grow. Because when you stop being who the world expects you to be, you start becoming who you really are. And that is the moment your life truly begins. Here's what they never tell you. Deep thinkers are not here to be understood by the many. They are here to awaken the few. Maybe you're not meant to be liked by everyone. Maybe you're here to be a mirror, to show people what they've forgotten, to speak what others are afraid to say. Yes, that comes with solitude. But solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is feeling unseen. Solitude is finally seeing yourself. And when you do, really do, you'll stop chasing their approval. You'll stop apologizing for your mind. You'll stop bending your truth to make it easier to swallow. Because you'll realize you were never too much. You were simply too real for a world that thrives on pretending. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you too serious, too emotional, too intense. Smile softly and go deeper. Because the truth is, this world needs you. Your rawness, your questions, your silence, your courage. Jung believed that only those brave enough to transform themselves could transform the world. That's you. And you never needed permission to be exactly who you are.